I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Carlos. I'm going to attempt to share my slideshow. How is that appearing to you? No. Are you seeing my speaker's notes or the slide?
Speaker's note.
Okay, let me try again. Stop share. This is, yeah, does anybody have any suggestions here? I want to share. I'm gonna, and so that's doing what now?
That seems to be working.
Oh, excellent.
So we see your slides and I will share slides and any other links in the chat.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you, NIST and Falcon afternoon lectures. I love that. Friday afternoons are a little tough, but that's okay. I'm really honored to share some things here today, and I hope it's the beginning of a longer conversation. I'm taking you at your word that these are fairly informal presentations. I have some things to share, but I also am hoping to get some information from you as a community as well. And so today the primary focus is on this new RCN proposal that we've had funded called Exploring the Intersections of Open Science and Open Education. And we really, as any RCN is wont to do, it's about gathering people together who normally don't talk to each other to try to address some, substantial and recalcitrant challenges in undergraduate STEM education. So let's see if I can advance my slides cleanly. There we go. So I always like to begin with the ending. And so I hope that by the end of this brief talk, that you'll have a few sort of ideas that you can use to inform your own teaching and maybe think of a way to extend your own sort of professional identity as a teaching scholar. So we are really focused on building learning experiences around open science resources, and we think it's an important strategy for increasing participation in science, right? Yeah, reaching audiences that don't generally identify as interested in science or have difficulties persisting in science. And we also think that this is sort of the future of STEM education, right? We are moving towards a model where the boundaries between science and education might be breaking down a little bit. However, it's not going to be simple, right? There's a lot that has to be done. First off, we have to sort of raise some awareness about what's currently going on and what some of the best strategies to use are when we're trying to use open science resources in our classrooms. And thinking about philosophically, what does it mean to have an open education approach? And so we'll dig into that a little bit today. And then we're going to have to do some really careful communication and coordination, because what we're talking about is using online scientific materials in our classrooms. Well, we need to know how we're going to get those, and we need to know that they're going to be there in the future, which we're all struggling with right now. And particularly when we're using sort of computational tools. And then everyone has got to be a learner, right? These are new things. They're new for research scientists. They're new for us as teaching professionals. And so professional learning opportunities are going to be essential. But most importantly, I want you to take away that you have the opportunity to participate in and contribute to this effort, right? And so part of this is just an introduction and an invitation. Okay, so briefly in this talk, we're going to begin by just saying a few words about what we call our Open Education Ecosystems, RCN. that's hosted by BioQuest. And then we're going to unpack open science a little bit. And then we'll take a closer look at what we mean by open education and what does that entail. And then we'll kind of come back and say, okay, so where do these two things intersect and what emerges when we start looking at that intersection? And there are many intersections. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of opportunities for you to follow up and stay connected. So I should have said this earlier, but please, there will be some natural breaks in the talk, but don't hesitate to put things in the chat. Somebody will tell me because I'm not going to be able to monitor that. Or just raise your hand and I think you'll pop to the top of my screen and I'll be able to see you. Okay, so as I mentioned, late fall, we got a nice note from the National Science Foundation saying that they had approved our RCN application for what we're calling Open Education Ecosystem Research Coordination Network. And my co-PIs are Drew Lamar and Deb Brooke. Drew Lamar is at William and Mary, and he's a mathematician in a biology department. And he is the director of cyber infrastructure for the BioQUEST Curriculum Consortium. And Deb Brooke is a recovering paleontologist, mammal paleontologist, and she's our deputy director of BioQuest. And you can click on the grant number there and see the abstract, the public abstract for that. I'm not going to speak to this figure because I'm trying to do a little bit more of an introductory talk, but let's just glance at it to say, when we're thinking about taking open science resources, we're talking about a vast array of things. And then thinking about thematically what's going to cut across all those different spaces where we might use open science resources in an educational context. And what do we need to attend to no matter where we're using those resources? Okay. So the mission statement for the project is really to address the complex landscape of accessibility challenges that face faculty when they're trying to adopt computational and data-centric tools and technologies for teaching and learning biology. So. Okay, great. So this project was awarded to the BioQuest Curriculum Consortium. You may know of the CUBES platform, which was a previous NSF-funded project that BioQuest was directly involved with and now actively manages. I'd just like to point out that the tagline for BioQuest is evolution and revolution in STEM education. And we've been having some discussions recently about whether we need to lean on the revolutionary side a little bit more. And then I've got web links there for the home pages for those two groups. So BioQuest has been around for a while. John Junk at Beloit was at Beloit College at the time when he got BioQuest rolling. It's a community of undergraduate biology faculty primarily, though there's a lot of interdisciplinarity there. And we're into 35 plus years. About 8 or 10 years ago, it became a nonprofit, which allows us to manage money in some different ways and collaborate on grants. I'm not going to read the mission to you, but you can take a look at it there. But I do want to point out, it's a little bit of a brag, but in the communities of transformation and their work scaling STEM reform, they looked at the BioQuest project, Project Kaleidoscope, POGLE in chemistry education, and the Sensor project in civics education. And these were a few of the nice things that they said about BioQuest. And you know, it's got an open feeling to it. It's got a looking towards the future feeling to it. And it's really faculty centric and designed to build people up. So that's the home for this activity. And to move into open science, or open science discussion, I'd really like to hear a little bit about what's on your mind or what's on your radar when you think of open science. So some of you have probably done a chat waterfall before. I'm pretty new to it, but it technically is very simple, so I'm excited. I'll just read the instructions this first time. We're going to use it a couple of times. So we got a little prompt here, and then we'll take a moment to reflect on the question and go ahead and type your responses into the chat box. But don't hit return yet. We just want to give everybody a chance to get a sentence or so in there, and then I'll ask everyone to hit return, and we'll see this cascade of information. And then we'll take a minute as a group to sort of read over things, raise a few points, and maybe have a little bit of discussion about that, which will lead into the next section of the talk. So in this initial prompt, really, what kinds of open science resources do you think would be useful in undergraduate teaching? And, primarily biology, but other contexts as well. So what types of open science resources? And then if you're using some of those, you can go ahead and add an asterisk next to those, because that's very informative. Any questions before we take on this task? Excellent. Let's just take a minute and put together a sentence or two, and then I will tell you when we're ready to hit submit. I have no idea how to judge time when I can't really see people, so I'm assuming that most people have created something. So let's go ahead and submit your response to this prompt and take a look and see what other people are saying. So I'm seeing using all sorts of different kinds of information sources like podcasts and digital books and video resources. And then I'm seeing some things like scientific publications and data sets and software. Supercomputers came up. There's lots of biology going on using supercomputers. Open data, very popular. Open source textbooks. That's going to come up a little bit more in our open education side. Databases, some of the other resources. Okay, so it's very interesting to me. We make a strong distinction between open science, which are generally resources, currently are generally resources generated by researchers and then made publicly available, and open education materials, which are may integrate some of those scientific resources, but are generally written for educational uses. And part of our agenda is to blur some of those boundaries. So I see people doing that already, which is interesting. Okay, so there are a whole host of active discussions and ways to represent what constitutes open science. And I pulled one from a paper that I happen to have handy. And I liked the representation because it captures the big things, right? We often think about open data sources that we can reuse to give students authentic experiences trying to reason with data. The methodologies, right? So there are a variety of computational tools and platforms that will host some of these open resources, open science resources. Peer review with open, if you know of the journal eLife, they've got a very developed open review process. Open access to those journal materials. Here we already see the open education resources, right? They're blending in because part of the openness involves making those resources accessible to communities beyond the disciplinary specialists who generated them. So a couple of things to recognize about open science is that, as I said, once you start to think about being open, being transparent, and being making all of your processes accessible to others, you realize there are many, many steps along the way that you might be interested in opening up. It's also important to remember that this is just emerging in science, right? There's been a big push with some of the funding agencies requiring open publication of data and so forth, but there's still a lot of debate about how what should be open, and open happens along a continuum, right? There are many things where people may be able to save their protocols and share their publications, but the raw data may have patient information in it. It may have sensitive information about endangered species or low habitats, and so or it may have commercial value that a company's working on. So open happens along a continuum, and the hope is that people will continue to push their practices to being more open. And then another thing to think about while we're looking at this is that, as I alluded to, many of these avenues for being open are supported by computational resources, right? So if you're going to share data, you got to have a platform that allows people to search and extract it. If you're going to support protocols, right, you need to have a place where people can store and index those carefully. So there are a couple of different things going on here. I want to go to a slightly more sort of nuanced view of open science, and this comes from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And they have been early and real proponents of open science. And so in this first view of it, we're looking at big categories, right? Scientific knowledge, the green area here, different ways that the products of science, the claims, the outcomes can be made open. But then there's also the infrastructure for doing that science, right? So how can we make those more accessible, the tools and so forth? And then, UNESCO's got a very big socially driven vision. And so they want to know about how the open is allowing for engagement with societal actors, right? How does it reach beyond the people doing the science to others who might want to participate or learn from it? And then the open dialogue with other knowledge systems, right? It's not just science. There's a complex range of ways that people are making sense of the world, and we need to have that openness extend into those areas. So this gets a little bit busy and complicated, and I'm not going to read through it, but it's here just to show you some of the details within these different segments of being open. And so I want to point maybe down to the open engagement of societal actors here. We've got crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, scientific volunteering, citizen and participatory science. We're going to see those coming up a little bit later as things that are actively going on right now. But I would highly recommend looking at this understanding of open science and the recommendations for open science from UNESCO. Okay, so that was intended to give us a sense of how diverse these open science resources can be and how they touch on so many aspects of the processes of science. But they, it takes a lot of energy for researchers to do this. Let's turn our attention to open education. And again, we'll do a little chat waterfall here with the prompt, what features or strategies come to mind when you hear the term open education? And so if you take a minute to type in a sentence or two into the chat, and then I will call for those to be sent in just a minute. Okay, what strategies or features come to mind when you hear the term open education? Let's see what we've got. Okay, so I see lots of free, so it's a lot of resources that I don't see it explicitly said, but that are licensed in a way that makes them free or very inexpensive to use, and they might be remixable, social annotations, choice and voice. Okay, so that's getting a little more into the philosophical aspects of what does it mean to think of an educational environment as being open, being connected. So open means it's connected in a variety of ways, right? To the student's interest, to the real world that they live in. This is great, and I see people who are using some of these resources have tagged them with asterisks. Does anybody want to explain a little bit more about what they shared? Okay, then I will continue on here. You're going to see a lot of these diagrams with elements around a central feature. But that's because in this notion of open, we're looking for all of these connections, right? It's an explicit attempt to reach out and connect with things. So just as we had open science connecting to open data and open education, we see reciprocal links here. Many people think of open education resources, right, which are published with a license that allow them to be remixed and reused and repurposed. We're going to dig in a little bit deeper to open pedagogy because it's sort of central to our notion of what we mean by really changing the classroom environment and the roles that the students and the teacher play. Again, open access publishing, and of course, we have to, almost everything we're doing now has a digital component. And so having the open source software to do that is very important. So again, just like in science, the role of open education materials is emerging, and it's not all or none, right? It's a continuum. Some courses have open learning environments for certain activities, and then other things are a little bit more closed. And so moving that continuum towards open practices requires significant investment, and you probably want to do it as part of a team or part of a community of people as a support system. So let's take a little bit deeper look at the open pedagogy. And again, there are a lot of words around this centerpiece of attributes of open pedagogy. But I think by looking at the bolded terms and then summarizing it a little bit, we can get a sense that one of the key pieces of open education, although it's a real culture change, right, is to think about changing your science classroom so that students are part of the teaching and learning process, in the sense that they are co-creating knowledge, they're making decisions, they are working in realistic and authentic environments, they are producing products that exist outside of the classroom and have meaning outside of the classroom. And so our notion of mastery of content is a little bit undermined here, and instead we're placing emphasis on engagement and students building practices that are part of their real world, right? Part of their experience. So if you haven't heard of open pedagogy or haven't really dug into it, I would highly recommend digging around a little bit. There are some amazing things. And we'll come back to it in just a minute when we look at some examples of the intersection. Again, I'm happy to take questions. Okay, let's do another one here. So I'm going to ask you for one more chat waterfall. What sorts of learning opportunities, right? These could be described as assignments or curricula or student outcomes, do you think emerge from working at the interface, right? So this is now where we're using open science resources and we're adopting open education practices. What kinds of things emerge in your mind when we commit to these two things? And I'll give you a minute and then we'll have everyone submit their chat. Okay, let's see what kinds of learning opportunities people are thinking about that emerge at the interface of open science and open education. Go ahead and submit into the chat. Okay, I see some generating data, analyzing data, right? Students get a sense of, well, you know, how do scientists argue? They go back to the data, right? Students can learn science process skills, right? We're pushing into the nature of science and understanding scientific practices territory, which is always promoted as being highly valued in our guiding documents in terms of the expectations for effective science education, but they're often very difficult to do if we have this sort of strict content focus. Creating videos to teach contents about public health, right. So a very popular thing to do in an open pedagogy is to have students produce materials for particular audiences, right? It might be an editorial for the local newspaper, it might be a letter to one of their representatives, it could be a module for their grandparents to learn a little bit about a scientific undertaking. So these are great answers. Great. So, you know, this is going on. It's happening. It's actually cures and citizen science are kind of taking off. In upper division courses, people are doing research that ties to maybe a faculty member's own research program in a laboratory setting. So and some people are beginning to teach about open science. So including, instead of talking about the sort of the basics of how data is collected and experiments are designed, they're adding into that, what does it mean to work in an open space, right? How do you document where you got your data? How do you use it responsibly, and so forth? And so there are a few emerging lectures now about the using open science, teaching open science practices. But the bulk of them are engagements, right? The students are involved in going into their community, trying to answer a question, whether it's data-based from that they're pulling from existing data, or whether they're generating their own data. And so while all of these are ongoing, there's very little sort of characterization of what's common across them and what some of the common pitfalls are. And so part of our project is taking a look at that. And it's still not all that widely adopted, right? Vision and Change, for example, right, came out in 2011, it's been around. They were calling for the introduction of research experiences as an integral component to biology education for all students, regardless of their major. And I think this is a key point. This is not just reserved for upper division students who are likely or interested in becoming STEM professionals. We're really talking about this unique opportunity to engage non-majors with some experiential learning around scientific practices and some development of their own identity as scientists. Another feature of operating in open spaces is that it sort of drives a set of values and principles. So, right, I had to look this up. These two words are very similar, right? They both drive our actions. The values are things that are sort of more internal, the things that we believe at our core. And then the principles are the way they manifest, right? The way that those beliefs play out in our actions. And so this is again from the UNESCO materials, and they're very committed to the open ethos, right? When you become committed to sharing your knowledge and how you generated that knowledge, then you are going to be practicing a set of values and principles that really relate to sort of development as a human, right? And connection with your civic responsibilities and things like that. So there's some deep water here around shifting to an open pedagogy strategy and using open science to do that. And it's going to take some adjustments, and it's a real culture change, right? This is why everybody hasn't jumped on board, because it's a significant shift in our teaching strategies. Okay, I'm getting close here. So one thing about working in these open environments is that they often involve mediation through computers, right? Databases to pull down materials, on computational tools that run on servers. Even open education resources sit inside of libraries or on people's web pages. I mean, who knows? And so part of the work that this project is doing is looking at this underlying computational connections across open resources. So these little clouds in education and science here in the left panel represent gateways, right? These are online spaces that serve up resources and tools to help a community get their work done. And so What we're looking at is how do we build explicit connections between gateways that are focused on education, providing services for education, and gateways that are focused on providing services for science. And so once you get the metadata and the computational findability worked out, then your open products are linked together as this sort of propeller model in the right panel, so that your OER has a link to the tool that you used to run that lab or do that analysis, and has a link to that data. And so by tightly connecting those, when people evolve them, adapt them for a new setting, they have clear connections that can be adjusted so that other people can find the data or change the data, other people can find the tools or change the tools, because all of this is evolving very rapidly. So the Cubes platform, which I mentioned before, is a gateway platform that's managed by the BioQUEST Curriculum Consortium, is a education service provider, essentially. So this is just referencing an article that you can download from the NSF, a free copy of it from the NSF PAR system. And if you look to well, let's start with the Open Education Resources lifecycle, right? In order to be able to find and adapt and use and reshare those materials, you need to have some sort of a space to do that. And when you start putting things into databases, you have a lot of control over how they're labeled and how they're searched and how they're connected to other things. So the Cubes platform, we pitch it as a science education gateway. We provide services to faculty that help them do their work more efficiently, whether it's collaborating with other faculty, whether it's finding and publishing open education materials, whether it's managing a project through a shared infrastructure, and being involved in professional learning that is less limited by time and space, right? You can connect with people across the country through a shared infrastructure. So this is kind of the technical side of some of the work that we're doing, but if you're teaching with open science materials and you're having students go to live databases and so forth, understanding how these gateways work becomes very important. And ultimately you want the students to have some sense of that as well. So the computer to computer conversation is some sort of summarized in these FAIR principles. So FAIR is an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is sort of a gold standard in open science resources that they, through effective searching or through linked metadata, you can connect to these other things and interact with them in predictable ways. And now we're saying, well, it's not just scientists, it's scientists and educators sharing this open environment. And how can we make these things that really come from different places, different goals, right? Teaching and learning versus solving new scientific problems, to so that they're accessible to other people. And this is the basis for the claim that effective use of open science and open pedagogy can broaden participation in science, is because they're fair and findable. So I'm going to end with a couple of action items or resources or opportunities for you. This is, I think it's an interesting time to be interested in this area because it's beginning to get some attention. If you're not familiar with the Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, and Open STEM Education, the RIOS Institute, I would recommend checking out their site. You can see the web link there. They host a variety of faculty engagement opportunities, working groups, and learning communities. They're starting up a learning community in the middle of February, so a couple of weeks from now, that will focus on integrating open science with open pedagogy. There you go. And you'll recognize some of these names here. Oops, sorry. Oh boy, hold on. That was bad. Am I still sharing? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry. I'm a fidgeter and I clicked my mouse in the wrong place. So this will be led by Karen Cangliosi and Carlos Goller, and they'll be meeting at this time, and there's a link down here at the bottom which has a lot more information and the opportunity to register or sign up for that activity. Carlos, you want to say anything else about it?
We'll have good discussions. Karen has everything planned out. Karen has the expertise and years of experience in the open science, open pedagogy community, and I'm around to help facilitate learning because I want to learn with this community too.
Excellent, excellent. Another opportunity that's coming up this summer, it's a little bit less accessible because it's a face-to-face meeting. If you're not familiar with the Allen Institute, it's just a data engine. It's sort of like NEON, National Ecological Observatory Network. Their sole focus is on systematic collection and distribution of scientific data. The Allen Institute deals with small things, while the NEON deals with large things. And I'd recommend if you go to the site that's listed at the bottom and back up, you can see more about the collections they have. They focus on neurobiology and cell biology and so forth. But they are hosting an Open Science and Undergraduate Education Symposium this June. And we are still within the window where people can submit talk proposals and poster proposals. So if you're interested in these topics, I would highly recommend checking that out if you have a reason to get to Seattle. And then our Open Education Ecosystem Research Coordination Network. We are up and running. It's very early times. Right now, we're primarily working with our steering committee to begin to map some of the landscape so that we can begin to generalize across different classroom contexts and computational tools and subdisciplines within biology. We use the term ecosystem because none of this happens in isolation, right? As I mentioned, once you start committing to an open environment, then you're intentionally trying to make yourself accessible and perceivable by other platforms, other user groups. And so we're getting going on this, but there are two, you can, if you would like to join the community, there is a, well, I'm a manager, so when I did this screenshot, it says manager in the upper right corner. But if you are not logged in, you will have the opportunity to join. There's some information about joining there, and that will require an account on Cubes. It's free and easy. But if you're just sort of interested in a taste or just an awareness, go ahead and on the front page of the OEE RCN, there's a place where you can drop your email and join a mailing list. And we're just getting that ramped up. So, so again, back to the takeaways. We're convinced, right? We wrote the proposal that building open learning experiences around open science is a great way to increase participation, get this engagement, understanding, contemporary nature of science out to communities that are underrepresented, get them to people who are not STEM professionals, but even the STEM professionals helping them understand the nature of open science and how to use it respectfully, how to contribute to it. And there are a few barriers that we mentioned at the beginning. And I really encourage people, if you're interested in this, to me, it's a great professional outlet, right? We're scientists at heart. In the classrooms, we can bring that science excitement and experience to our students through these opportunities. So with that, I'll say thank you. Acknowledge our steering committee, who's extremely helpful. You'll see that they represent diverse stakeholders, from science service providers to education service providers to professional societies, things like that, all of which can play in these open environments. And I want to invite you to reach out to me if you have questions or comments. And I hope you'll sign up for the newsletter or join the group, and that we're going to be, so once we get the ball rolling, we'll be hosting a variety of projects that have open science resources and open education resources, and then having professional development around those and encouraging people to adapt them for their own use in their own teaching settings. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. I had a hard time keeping up with lots of links and resources you shared, but hopefully people can visit both uh, the OEE project and sign up for the newsletter, and the Rios and Allen Institute. But I'll pause and ask, what questions do people have for Sam and these projects?
I assume people have their videos off because they're drinking beer, because it's almost 5 o'clock. On the East Coast, on the East Coast.
And you can put the question, you can unmute or put the question in the chat.
Yeah, if you, Carlos, can you chat the link to the slides again? These will be
Yeah.
published the next day or two. The slides will be, and then they'll be accessible at the OEE site. And I can share them with NIST. If you know who's here, you can send them out to people. Do you have a question, Karen? No? Okay. Excellent. Well, I hope everyone enjoys their weekend, and take care of yourselves during these challenging times.
There is one question in the chat from Brenda.
Oh, excellent. Can you give some specific examples of how to use just one of the resources? Yeah, so I struggled with this a little bit in preparing this, because our project is really trying to be integrative across the whole landscape of this intersection of open science and open education. And it leads to a lot of hand waving, and I apologize for that. So what we're doing is we're partnering with a variety of funded projects, primarily NSF funded projects, that are focused on bioinformatics education, or genomics, or who are working with, well, Carlos had a nice RCN on high throughput computational tools. So we will be annotating and sort of disseminating resources from those projects and trying to sort of fold them within this framework that we're developing for the intersection of open science and open education. So there are, if you look around for various cures, there are some amazing cures that now cut across multiple campuses. They get scientific papers published. Citizen science, there's a great group on Cubes that happens to be hosted on Cubes that is looking at the citizen science and undergraduate biology education, and they have a bunch of resources, and we'll be amplifying their messages and sort of describing them through our framework as we go on. Lots and lots of people pull down data sets and then give them to students to have them recreate a figure or look at particular relationships between variables. So it's extremely diverse in terms of what it might be. Sorry, I kind of dodged your question. Did you want to follow up at all? Awesome.
Good. This is where I struggle too, where Brinda's question is, right? There's so much out there. How can I use this for what I think is important for my students? How can I take this? So we'll just have to dig around and share.
Well, in 6 months or a year, we'll be much closer to being able to point to. I mean, I will share some of the things that I'm aware of. I don't know if you guys have a list of participants or if you have a website that you can put it up on, but it's just a little. There are lots of things. All right. Well, my Uber is coming in 5 minutes to take me to the airport, so I have to.
Thank you so
Where do you get to
much.
go, Sam?
I'm visiting my parents in Atlanta.
You're the best. You're the best. I heard they're getting some warm weather down there.
Excellent. I can use it.
Safe travel, Sam.
All right. Thanks, Mom.
Thank you. Safe travels.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
all. Nice to see
Bye,
you,
Karen.
Karen, Sharon, Melanie, Pankaj.
Bye-bye.